If I asked you to draw a picture with a red crayon, what would that picture look like? Would it be full of different colors? Well, of course not, because I gave you a red crayon to draw it with. Now, would you rather have a whole box of crayons, hundreds, maybe thousands of different colors to choose from? This analogy is meant to illustrate a very simple truth. Which is better, collectivism or individuality? A lot of people put a lot of stock in collectivism, that it protects us, that it keeps us safe, that's more rewarding. But I have found through experience that collectivism is limited in what it can do for us. While it may be true that while you are in cliques in high school, you are safer from the bully. If you're part of the jocks, you're not going to get bullied. If you're part of the popular kids, you're not going to get bullied. If you're part of this clique or that clique, these bullies prey on individuals. But let's examine real-world examples of other forms of collectivism. A collective military, perhaps, such as the Russian military or the United States military. Ask yourselves, how well do they fare against guerrilla tactics? A group of individuals operating on their own basis and attacking on their own terms, compared to a highly structured, organized force with superior manpower. Whether you're talking about the Russians or the Americans, you find in both cases, and we'll go as far back as the beginning of the American country, the United States. The British were an overwhelming military force, fighting against 13 colonies with inferior firepower and manpower as well as resources. Who won? Well, history has already proven that we won that battle. Then we fast forward. When the Russians tried to go into the Middle East, overwhelming force, overwhelming power, and resources. Who won? They finally gave up because they couldn't conquer the Middle East. Then the Americans tried, with the British's help. Did they succeed? They're trying to. But aside from bombing the entire Middle East and turning it into a plate of glass, nuclear glass, there will be no success because the superiority of the militaries that go in there and the highly structured organizations that fight, while they may have the power and the numbers, lack the mobility of smaller groups, the ability to choose for themselves when and where they will attack. While they still have some semblance of a chain of command, a leader, they are smaller, more maneuverable, and can outflank the enemy, disappear and reappear. Their tactics range in a variety of ways. They don't fight with guns all the time. Sometimes they do. They break the rules. When I was talking to some U.S. military personnel, and not a lot of them like to talk about it, but one of them told me that they were in either Afghanistan or Iraq, one of the Middle Eastern countries, fighting for America, and their enemies, whether it be the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, were drugged. And on purpose, they drugged themselves. What did they drug themselves with? They were doped up on heroin, cocaine, and PCP. The American soldiers were not, which meant these terrorists, as we call them, were superior. They didn't feel pain. They didn't feel it when you shot them in the heart or blew off their legs. The only way you could kill them was shoot them in the heart or the head. Not that much different than zombies in sci-fi and fiction movies. So the question becomes, how do you defeat a force that's almost unbeatable? That is the force we were fighting. Now, the reason I'm bringing up these examples and talking about these specific things is very simple. We have a problem all around the world where we believe that collectivism can solve all our problems, when the contrary is absolutely true. In order to have a beautiful picture that everybody can enjoy, you need a multitude of colors. And I'm not analogizing this to mean races. I'm talking about just colors. And the equation is that each color equals an individual. Each individual has something to contribute. And if we work together, you can create a beautiful picture. But as a collectivist society, a new world order, one world government, there's one color for everybody. Not everybody will agree with that color. So what do you do when you have a picture that's supposed to be drawn in red and somebody comes up to you and tries to give you a blue pencil or a blue crayon, a yellow crayon, an orange crayon, a black crayon? Do you bring that in and use that in the picture, or do you refuse it? The answer is you refuse it. And I'm not saying it based on you as an individual. I'm talking about the real world. In the real world, red, the crayon red, is rich, powerful, or both, has good connections, whatever it may be. Red is superior because it's part of the collective. If you're a Star Trek fan, imagine the Borg. If you're a Doctor Who fan, imagine the Cybermen. These are two perfect examples in science fiction of what collectivism will ultimately lead to. Another parallel is the Hunger Games. The state in the Hunger Games is the collectivist ideology here in our world now. It may not seem like it, but the course we're taking right now will inevitably lead to a massive war. And we have a choice. Do we want to be individuals with independent thought, action, with independent loves, memes, tradition, word? Or do we want to be part of the collective? Do we want to be normal? Do we want to be like everybody else? Drive the same type of cars? Talk the same type of talk? I heard an analogy once on a favorite sci-fi show of mine. Humans. They all do all this talking. They all talk but never say anything. You see that every day in America and abroad. We like to talk, but we don't talk about anything of consequence. We don't talk about how we can come together and create faster than light travel, anti-gravity, or any great technology that will change our future and our progression in this world. Instead, we simply do what we do, not because we want to, but because being normal is preferable for some reason than being an individual. And we're back. So before I was talking about collectivism versus individuality. We're going to examine the pros and cons of each argument. Now I left off with the examples of the U.S. military and the crayons. A better analogy for the crayons would be a box of red crayons or a box of multicolored crayons. One's a collective of individuals, one's a collective of simply one. One idea, one meme, one tradition. This is the question. Which is better? And obviously most people, I think, would tend to agree that the box of multicolors would give you a better opportunity to draw a better picture. So once we move past the analogy, we have to ask about real-world examples. Rugged individuals. Who were they? Where are the real-world examples? Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, I would say, would be rugged individuals. They challenged the collective status quo. They believed that the African Americans deserve the same rights as everybody else. And I have to agree with them. People, and I mean a few, might disagree with that in rare cases, maybe in America, but usually abroad, that maybe that's not right. But that's not individual thought, that's collectivism. Racism isn't something that, it's something that is learned. And part of this individuality means expressing it sometimes. Now, what's acceptable in expressing your individuality? Simply being who you are is not forcing it upon anybody else. Following the same rules as everybody else doesn't make you part of the collective all the time. But sometimes it does. For me as an individual, I believe it's important to exercise all of my rights. But if I did that, I'd be in jail for the rest of my life. At least in America. And people will say, well, wait a minute, this is the freest country in the world. I have to analogize this as well. There's a state-of-the-art theme park that's built 20 years ago. The rides all still work. It's still one of the best parks, but it was built 20 years ago. Several other parks were built after it, but were inferior. They're newer and shinier, but they're still inferior. As time progresses, the 20-year-old state-of-the-art park begins to deteriorate more. The parks around it also deteriorate. Slowly, all of the parks slide into oblivion, but the state-of-the-art one is kept up the most. It still works, but it's nothing like what it was when it began. That is America. Around the world, freedoms are being taken away in almost every country. But at the same time, some countries are gaining more freedom than the American people. People might argue with this and say that's not true. But ask yourself, there are 2 countries that are more free when it comes to firearms. There are, several countries that are much freer when it comes to the media. In fact, in overall freedoms, we're not even number 1 anymore. When it comes to political freedom, we don't even come close anymore, because we are based on what's called a 2-party system. The 2-party system, while it was thought to be a good idea, is anything but, because there are 2 parts to a coin. And we have found ourselves in a place where we argue head or tails, which is better, head or tails. The reality of the situation is that neither is better, since it's part of the same coin. I'm sorry, somebody came into my makeshift studio. I've completely lost my train of thought. I know we were talking about individuality versus collectivism, but I'm not sure where I left off. Anyway, one has to consider all the possibilities. Look at the pros and cons. Freedom in America. We believe we are the freest country in the world, not because we are, but because that's a narrative. We also believe the 2-party system works, not because it does, but because that's the narrative. We believe in global warming or climate change for the same reason. If you asked me, have you seen something that's missing from my room? And I say no. And if you ask me if I stole it, I say no. And then you ask me, when was the last time you saw it? And I said, last week. Then 3 days later, you ask me the same 3 questions. Have you seen this object? Oh yeah, I saw it here. Oh, when was the last time you saw it? Oh, like 2 days ago. Then you ask a 3rd question, I give you a different answer. Every few days you ask me, I give you different answers. Would you believe I was telling the truth? Most people would say no. But on the same token, when you ask a scientist, well, what's global warming? Oh, it's not global warming anymore, it's climate change. And if you've been paying attention, you know they call it climate change now. Their story changes, their narrative changes to fit whatever evidence they choose to use. The same thing is true with the left-right paradigm. Does it work? Oh, yes, it works. Then how come it doesn't always work for the people? Oh, well, that's irrelevant, or, oh, it does, you just don't see the examples, or, oh, you're not paying attention. Well, the opposite is true. If you're asking these questions, you are paying attention. There's a picture I like to describe. It's a picture of a pyramid with 2 legs, Democrat and Republican, marching left, right, left, right. The Republican leg is stepping on Democrats, and they're saying, I'll vote Republican. The Democrat leg is stepping on Republicans, and next time they'll vote Democrat. That's a confusing way to describe it, I know, but it's a hard picture to describe. That is exactly what is happening here in America today. We believe that one side is better than the other. We are arguing over which is better, head or tails. But the reality of this situation is quite simple. Somebody comes in and says, why are you arguing over head or tails? It's one coin. But everything we do is divided into polarity. Left, right, good, evil, up, down. And we have to question, does this make sense? Is this normal to polarize everything? Black, white, Native American, American. What does it all mean? It means we're being divided. There's an old adage, divide and conquer. What does that mean? That means when you want power, when you want to maintain that power, what do? You divide your subordinates. You divide the people beneath you. But the problem is in America that nobody is beneath anybody else. And yet, we accept that we are beneath somebody else. That a lawyer is smarter than you or I. That they know things we can't know because we're not smart enough. That a scientist is smarter than we are because they have a degree. that a psychologist is better at diagnosing psychological issues because they have a PhD. While I do agree to some extent that knowledge can be superior, there is a great deal to be said for individuality over collectivism. There's a lot of people that have begun to treat their own problems, medically, financially, in the court of law. Carl Miller is one such person that teaches individuals the base code of law. Carl Miller can teach you, and me, and any of your friends, if they are willing to learn, with 6 hours of your time, how to begin in a journey that will create the knowledge in you that enables you to fight for yourself in a court of law as the best of the lawyers would, and in fact, make you superior to them, not because you are superior, but rather because they are like a Windows or a Macintosh technician. One moment. Blackberry tea, delicious. The technicians for Macintosh and Windows computers can fix surface problems. They know how to fix things that are on the surface, on the operating system. But if you have somebody who knows Windows base code or Macintosh base code, can they fix those same problems? Yes. They go about it from a completely different way. One that the OS experts, the operating system ones, wouldn't completely understand because they don't know it. The base code of the computer is what makes everything go. If they know the base code, they can operate on a different level and fix the same problems by going from the ground up, fixing the foundation, while the surface experts can only fix the problems on the surface. That's what Carl Miller will teach you. He can teach you the base code of law so you can control and alter laws that are technically unlawful. There are people out there, and Dr. Oz is becoming one of them, who is leaning towards more holistic medicine instead of conventional medicine. And the government is getting mad at him for it. Not because it's their job or that he's breaking a law necessarily, but because he challenges the status quo of the biggest lobby for the government. And we have to remember that both Democrats and Republicans, the entire political spectrum, is financed not by people like you and I who may not be rich or powerful, but by big corporations, big companies like the pharmaceutical industry, the lumber industry. Many people may not know this, but the reason marijuana was outlawed was not because it was a dangerous drug that would kill people or make them hurt people, but because William Randall Hearst accused marijuana of making black people rape white women and create jazz music, and that it would make Mexicans take over our land. It's extremely racist. But he said that, not because it was true, and obviously it wasn't, but because he was afraid of the competing industry. And many people, well, that's an example of how freedom of speech can be bad. Well, in that day and age, there weren't a lot of people that understood marijuana, so they bought into the hype, just like people buy into the hype about it today. So the question becomes, how do you counteract these strong, powerful voices? Well, back in the day, there really wasn't a way unless you went out to the street and talked to people on your commute to work and mass transit. But as technology progresses, the best way to do it is what I'm doing right now, telling you and anybody else who is willing to listen, anywhere in the world who wishes to click on this video and listen to my words. My message can spread from coast to coast of the United States and to every country in the world in a blink of an eye. Which means you do not need money or wealth or power to get your voice heard anymore. And that's why this is the only time we will have in human history, besides the future, to change what is to come. And back to the argument of collectivism versus individuality. Do you feel that you are better as an individual? That you can be weird, unique, funny, stand out from the crowd? be in the spotlight of your own? Or should you be with a collective, only noticed because you are part of that collective? I'm a Democrat, so I'm with other Democrats, or I'm a Republican with other Republicans. I'm black with other blacks, or white with other whites. Is that better than being part of an individual collective? A group of individuals with own unique traditions, stories, skin color? I would prefer the latter more than the former. I like being in the company of any person, of any creed, nationality, or religion. Not because I want to, well, in part because I do, but also because I enjoy learning about them, learning what they have to say, learning their opinion, their viewpoints. And a lot of people today, they don't look up to their phones for information or enlightenment. They look to it for communication. The same could be said with tablets sometimes, gaming, communication, and entertainment. But not the type of communication where we discuss groundbreaking ideas and future that we can create together, but rather simply to talk about our day, or what we had for lunch, or who we don't like or do like. Well, I find it very hard to dislike anybody. I've chosen to forgive everybody who's done me wrong. And there's quite a few. I was robbed at gunpoint once by 2 African Americans, but I don't hate them. I don't blame them. And the reason is very simple. It's not their fault. Our culture has destroyed the morals of the individual and tried to bring everybody into a collective mind. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. That is the voice I hear every time I turn on mainstream news or hear the mainstream narrative. Believe us or you are stupid. I don't believe that. You each have your own mind to make up, and I can't tell you what to think. I try analogy and logic to try to help you make up your mind, to show you my point of view, so maybe you can make a balanced opinion of your own. But I don't ask you to believe like I do, and I really don't want you to, because that would counteract my point. You are an individual. You have the right to believe as you choose. But I want to make it clear that believing what you choose does not mean falling in with the majority. That is the problem with our country, with our government in the United States, and with people. They'd rather be normal. And to me, normal means part of the collective. They'd rather choose to believe what others believe, not because it's right, but because they don't want to be ostracized. They're fearful of doing the right thing in extreme odds. And I wish people would relinquish such fear. I myself have found it more freeing to be a true individual, to believe as I do, not as I'm told. I was raised in a Christian environment. I was an Episcopalian, part of the Episcopal Church, and I believe I still am. And I was sent to school in Catholic school, raised several hours a day until I graduated high school by the Christian faith. And I had 2 nuns. One was a conventional nun who wore normal civilian clothes, and the other was the old-fashioned black and white habit nun. And yes, she said stuff like, "Empty barrels make the loudest noises." I disliked her for a while. But these teachers brought order to my life, gave me perspective. I questioned my faith later on in life, even questioned whether or not God existed. And while science tries to say there is no proof, I'm not going to say God exists or he doesn't exist. That's up to you to decide. But in my experience, the evidence that there is stuff we still have to answer, still questions that need pondering, is unimaginable, unextinguishable. There are so many questions that I have. For instance, the variable in the universe, one variable I don't know the scientific term for it, but there's a variable so finite, so small, that if it were several hundredths of a place negative in either direction, our galaxy, our universe would not exist. Another very important question is what came before the Big Bang? And science has yet to explain that. Another very good question is how do you explain the extreme accuracy of out-of-body and near-death experiences? I myself have had two, a near-death experience and an out-of-body experience. And both times, I saw my world around me in clarity, not like a dream where things are close but not quite, but simply exactly as they are. The moment I left my body, both times, I saw the room around me and heard thoughts in my mind that I dare not repeat, but that were so amazing and incredible that I knew that in that moment there was life after death. There was something to look forward to, and I chose to change my life to correlate to that experience. People will say, well, there's no life after death. That, I can assure you, from my perspective, my opinion, it is. In fact, I believe that life after death is what life really is. This is a fleeting experience. Nothing more, in my opinion. But I don't want to dwell too much on the supernatural or the existential existence or the question of our origin, because that is something each and every one of you must explore for yourself. I ask you, implore you, do not listen to me. Simply do a search on Startpage. It's a private search engine that utilizes Google and won't track you. Startpage. And use it to examine both sides of the coin in order to come to the opinion of whether or not there is a coin there to be had. Look at pro-God and against God theories and examine both of them thoroughly. That is what I have done. That is how I reached my opinion. But I must continue. There are so many issues in our country, so many varying opinions. For me, I'll tell you exactly what I believe. I believe that global warming is a lot more complex than we choose to believe. Honestly, I do not believe that the planet is warming. I do believe that the climate is changing. I think that the changes we are experiencing, if there is any, are part of a natural cycle that began long before man existed. I'm also not a 6-day guy, and if you read the Bible, you know what that means. From my perspective, God is something that exists beyond our time and space, which means a day to him, we'll liken it to a life form lesser than humans. Say ants, perhaps. Do ants have any inkling of what a human lifespan is? They glimpse a human for a second, but to us, they die, reproduce, and the cycle goes and goes and goes. The life of an ant is infinitesimal compared to the life of a human. Their travels are tiny and short compared to the travels of a human who can travel anywhere in this world. While an ant cannot cross an ocean, a human can. So what would be the opinion if an ant could write a story about a human? What would their story, their narrative look like if we read it? There's a communication gap, I believe. That's what I believe. The Bible is neither literal nor metaphorical, but a combination of both. It's also a matter of perception. Furthermore, I believe that guns are very important to the individual, their safety, their security. That anybody who has a sound mind and a good heart has the right an unalienable right to own one and come by it by peaceful means. And from a constitutional law perspective, that such laws that we have now is a collective of both pro and against guns. There are states that are embracing guns while some states reject them. There are laws that embrace them and some that reject them. There are cities and locations that do the same, that either object to guns, accept guns, or have no opinion thereof. And thus our country is a melting pot of different viewpoints on guns. That doesn't work when it comes to firearms. You either are for or against them. You have to be 100% against or 100% for. And the reason being is the evidence we see. From the Caltech shooting to Sandy Hook to the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. They are all examples of a divergence between pro and against guns that exists in this country. Which means that if you examine where these shootings happen, they're all gun-free zones. They're all against guns. And yet the catastrophe happens in those locations. Whereas places that implore the use of guns, or allow it, they don't have nearly as many problems as those that are against it. And the reason being is simple. That you can't have two types of gun feelings in this country that were founded on the firearm. And some people may take umbrage with that. Well, we weren't founded on it. We won our freedom from the British with the rifle. We explored new lands with the rifle. We hunted with the rifle. If it weren't for the rifle, I doubt America would exist today. If the British said you can start a new colony but no weapons, it'd have been very hard to fight a war to win our independence, and we would all be speaking in a British accent and having a cup of tea. Well, I still am, just because I love tea and I don't want to get too much caffeine, but still, you get the point. Without firearms, we wouldn't be the America we are today. But we have this irrational fear of firearms. Nobody goes out and says, we've got to ban all hammers. But hammers are more brutal and destructive than a firearm. If somebody hits you with a sledgehammer, it can kill you. And it never needs to reload. Same thing with a knife. It can kill you. It never needs reloaded. Same thing with a baseball bat. Or think of a bow and arrow. Or a hatchet. All these things are weapons in their own right. All these things can do irrefutable damage to an individual. Heck, a frozen ball of cookie dough thrown at somebody can knock them unconscious. Everything and anything can be a weapon. Yet we focus on firearms, specifically quote-unquote assault rifles. Not because they're inherently more dangerous, but because the narrative doesn't like them. Now, why doesn't the collective like firearms? That is the question we should be asking. Is it because they are truly dangerous? The answer, in my opinion, is no. But I should shorten this. And there are so many other issues I could talk about, but I want to get back to the main point. Should we embrace collectivism? Should we be about the norm, about a status quo that shouldn't be challenged under any circumstance? And remember, without challenging the status quo or the norm, then women wouldn't have the right to vote. Women would be inferior to men. Also, black people would not have the same rights as white people. Indians would still be trampled on to some extent. Every culture that one person, group of people that thinks they're superior, finds inferior, would be trampled upon. That is the collectivist model. A group of superiority and a group of inferiority. Now ask yourselves, are you rich and powerful? If the answer is no, then you find yourself in the group of inferiors. And if you believe yourself to be rich and powerful, ask you, do you have any friends that aren't rich and powerful? Would you be willing to give up those friends in order to be part of the collective? I find it very hard to believe that everybody in this country and around the world would choose to be part of the collective, even if they promise safety and security. I saw another quote, and I'd like to leave with this. Which is preferable? Survival or life? Survival means making it from day to day, paying your bills, going to work, going out for a drink after work, going home and repeating the week. That is survival. Not living, not experiencing, not having fun. Life is something lived with only the minor, most basic rules to guard against transgression. An example would be if the Constitution was 100% in effect, the only laws in existence would protect property and people, nothing more, and would only charge and convict those who have injured one of the two, either people or their property, meaning no murder, no rape, no assault, no burglary, no vandalism, no manslaughter. Collectivism is based around rules of somebody in power choosing what they find acceptable or non-acceptable and forcing it across the board on all people. So you see, which is more preferable, survival or life? Survival, collectivism, being part of the normal crowd, being part of the collective, being assimilated, or life? Life being liberty, happiness, freedom, justice, equality, love. Which do you prefer? Well, I've taken up enough of your time, and I don't want to get too long because this may get boring. Everybody have a great day, a good night, wherever you are across the globe or the world. My name is Robert Eastman, and I'm signing off on this wonderful night. Stars out, moon shining. I hope you've enjoyed this little show. If I ever get the money, I'm sure I'll try to expand to a point where I can have a studio that actually sounds even better, and maybe even some guests. And if I do get guests, I would rather have people to call in for 10, 15 minutes and discuss topics with them. Somehow I think it'd be more productive than having people who write books or are in movies or news media. I want to hear from the individual, not the collective. I want to hear from you. So feel free to leave your comments below, subscribe to my channel, or get a hold of me. I'm on Google+, Scruples, Facebook, and Meet Me. It's really hard to remember all those passwords. Have a good night, everybody.